All right, everybody. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start taking a look at part one of what is more than likely going to be a three-part video series on one of the more important styles of writing or writing theories that you're going to come across, especially, if you're looking to transfer over to the university, or if you're taking not a freshman level class necessarily, but maybe an upper level class, and that's what we call rhetorical analysis. So essentially what rhetorical analysis is you are not evaluating this is not like a book report, or it's not like a you giving your opinion or arguing for whether or not something is correct. Rhetorical analysis is actually evaluating the writer more so than the content, or just the content. So we're going to take this nice and slow because there's a lot of terminology, and I want to make sure that you have an understanding before we move on to some of the more intricate details. So what rhetorical analysis is trying to understand what type of writing is going on, what the goal is of the writer, and how successful they are at actually achieving that goal. So we're going to start off by taking a look at a couple of these triangles. If you've watched some of the other videos, I am not a good artist, but oftentimes visual guides are really, really, really helpful in trying to visualize something. So when we take a look at this one over here, these are meant to be equilateral triangles, so forgive me if they're not 100% equal, but you have a relationship between the author, their audience, and the author's purpose. So for example, let's say that I was attempting to get you to vote for a particular candidate, or I was trying to create an advertisement to get you to buy a product, or I was trying to convince you that my way of thinking about something is the correct way of thinking about it. Then what we would need to have happen is I would need to be, as the author or the writer, I'd need to be aware of who my audience is and also what my purpose is meant to be. And so your purpose also needs to have an awareness about who the audience is and also who the writer is. And then finally, the audience should be able to understand or discern who is writing this and what their purpose is in writing this is. So let's say that you were going to visit a relative in a assisted living facility or a nursing home or a hospital or something like that. And you were trying to get them to understand why a particular medication might not be in their best interest, or if this is in fact the right place for them to receive treatment. Well, if you have an awareness that your audience is someone who is a little bit more mature, a little bit older, not part of your generation, then you would make sure as your writer not to fill your writing with a bunch of terminology that your audience isn't going to understand. So, let's see, what's a good example of this? Okay, so I am not trying to be political or anything like that, but when you take a look 7 to 10 years ago, I mean, the concept, and I'm going to sound incredibly old and incredibly lame here, so just bear with me. If you were 7 to 10 years ago even familiar with what the concept of being woke was or wokeness, then you generally understood it to be something that, it meant you were cognizant of certain realities and things like that. But when we take a look, especially those on the more conservative side of things, if we were to take a look at the way that they perceive being woke now, they view it as something very different than the people that initially constructed and used the term. So, and it's not a race thing, it's not a political thing, it's just, well, it is a political thing, but we're not going to talk about the political thing. But we have two different groups of people. The group of people that came up with and started using the term, and then a second group of people that came along and have sort of given it a different, and in certain people's minds, more sinister or controlling version of whatever it is. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, just turn on a conservative news channel. And my guess is it won't take you very long to, hear someone talking about wokeness or cancel culture ruining American society and all of that stuff. So, anyway, so if you're talking to somebody and you're aware of how old they are, maybe you're aware of some of their beliefs or some of their morals or things like that, then you can tailor, as the author, you can tailor your message or your purpose more specifically for that audience. So again, let's take it back to the nursing or assisted living facility. Let's say that you were going to give a speech to honor your grandparents' 40th wedding anniversary or 50th wedding anniversary or something like that. If you were going to have music accompanying you, or you wanted to play some music for them to dance to or something like that, I mean, chances are you're not going to choose some of the more popular artists that are out there right now. Like, you probably wouldn't choose, well, I don't know, depending on your grandparents, but, just because she was in the Super Bowl recently, you probably wouldn't choose Rihanna, or you wouldn't choose a big rock band like Måneskin right now, or you wouldn't choose, well, I was trying to think of a rap group and I was about to say Migos, but you get what I'm saying. You would choose someone from their generation. So, if they were, let's see, if they got married when they were in their 20s and they're in their 70s now, maybe like Motown, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, AC/DC, I'm trying to think of who else. And certainly down here, you have Zydeco and different types of musical cultures, which a lot of people, regardless of age, seem to listen to. So, but think about who your audience is and how you can shape your argument to be more attractive to them. Essentially, if you use the rhetorical method, you're trying to manipulate someone. So if you're doing a rhetorical analysis, then you're judging how well the writer is influencing the people that they are trying to deliver this message to. So you can consider it to be a success if, say, You're writing an advertisement to get people to buy a certain brand of soda, and sales for that particular brand of soda go up. Or you are trying to get them to vote for a certain political candidate, and that candidate gets elected. Or you're looking to get people to stop doing something like drinking or smoking or something like that, and the number goes down and down and down and down and down. So you can really judge success by, number one, what the overall results are, but you can also judge it by how well they intertwine themselves, their audience, and their purpose for writing. So that's probably the most important thing to kind of understand with this is this needs to be in balance. You have to have an understanding of these three different relationships in order to be extremely effective as someone who's practicing the art of rhetoric. But again, you're going to be asked to do rhetorical analysis, which means you're meant to evaluate how successful both this and this are. So, now that we've gotten over this part, let's take a look at the elements that make up this rhetorical triangle here. We have three different Greek terms. One of them is ethos, one of them is logos, one of them is pathos. And together, each of these three help you evaluate how successful the rhetorical method has been for the author. So, with ethos, it looks a lot like the word ethics, and that's the word that the modern day English word that we get from that. In reality, what this is credibility. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you or the author are looking to enhance your credibility in approaching your audience, think about this in terms of where would you go if you had to prove something to someone? Would you go to the crazy, well, let's not say crazy. Would you go to the mentally disturbed person who's experiencing homelessness on the corner and ask their opinion about the current state of affairs in this country? Or would you perhaps want to read an article written by a political scientist or an economist, or you wanted to go to one of the top publications in the United States or wherever to have an understanding of factually and statistically why something might be true? So everybody, if you know the old saying, opinions are like something. Everyone has one. So you want to make sure that the people, especially, that you're referencing for background information, for facts, for statistics, in fact, actually have some level of credibility. Well, how do you judge that? If they work for a publication, a TV studio, a movie studio, a publishing house, a newspaper, a magazine that you have heard of, especially in this day and age, like, for example, the local paper, as well as I'm sure that it's written, if you stack up somebody writing for the local paper here in Laffey versus someone who's writing for, say, the New York Times newspaper or the Washington Post, both which have much higher circulations and have been in operation for far longer, then the person with more credibility is the person essentially that has the better job. So if you have a professor who, writes and teaches at an Ivy League school or someplace like Duke or Stanford, or I'm trying to think of another one, even LSU or something, or the university here in town, versus someone like me who works for a community college. I may have good opinions and good ideas, but the fact that they're working for a much more prestigious university and have been doing it for longer than I have automatically makes them more credible than I am. So how does our author, when they're using the rhetoric method, how do they use credibility? Do they quote important people? Are they a highly decorated or important person? How do they choose where to cite their information from? The better the sources, the more prestigious the jobs or the reputation of people involved, the more credibility that is actually going to have. So ethos has to do with credibility. Who are you? Where do you work? What have you done? And the more and more and more you accumulate in that, the more credibility that you have. Also, another way of looking at that is how long have they been doing this job? I mean, even if you're taking a look at, say for instance, you have someone, and I would hope they would be a manager or something, but let's say you have someone who has literally worked their way up from cashier to being manager at a McDonald's, and they've been working at that McDonald's for 15 to 20 years. And then you have somebody who's been working at Burger King for 2 to 5 years. Well, just because they're not academics doesn't mean that they don't still have credibility. You would want the person who's been working at McDonald's for 15 or 20 years, where they've done literally everything, versus someone at Burger King that's only been working there for a couple of years and maybe hasn't worked or had all the responsibility that the other person does. So credibility is something that you have to establish, but generally speaking, longevity and where you work equals, sort of that level of credibility that you're looking for. So the longer you're somewhere, the more you publish or the more you create, and the more prestigious the places you work all work towards credibility. All right. Pathos is probably the easiest to understand because it's something that we see every single day, just by streaming something or listening to the radio or a podcast or turning on the television and watching commercials. So I don't know how many of you saw the Super Bowl ads from this year, but there was a kind of a jokey one that had Sarah McLachlan in it, and it was talking about singing about sad animals or something like that. Well, if you've ever seen them, there are these ASPCA commercials where Sarah McLachlan, beloved Canadian songstress, essentially sings, or they play one of her songs over these pictures, just if you're an animal lover, they're heart-wrenching, of mistreated dogs and kittens, and I'll never understand how people can do stuff like that to animals, but to encourage people to want to donate. Same thing with like the Children's Miracle Network and stuff like that, where they would have like the guy walking around, like, this is way back when I was a kid, but like an Ethiopian or a Sudanese village with, frankly, kids that were very, very malnourished, and talking about how for pennies a day you can make sure that this child has enough to go to school and eat and everything, get clean water. That is an attempt to play on your emotions. And that's what pathos is. Pathos is the easiest of these three to apply because we're all susceptible to it. But at the same time, it's also the most powerful because people get very, very attached to their emotional manipulation. So if it's not done well, it can kind of backfire on you and come across as just way over the top. Same thing like if you ever see like political candidates or things like that that are attempting to make you feel a certain way, they'll harken back to these touchstone moments for America. Again, I hate to keep going back to the Super Bowl, but it was like 3 days ago, so it's fresh on my mind. If you watched the very opening part of it, they had a tribute to a former NFL player who signed up for the military after 9/11 and then was tragically, you can look it up on your own, just understand what they told you during the broadcast is not the full story, but Pat Tillman inspires a lot of Americans to feel a certain way. You know, they feel patriotic, they feel sad, you know, they feel this sense of duty or honor, or they feel revulsion at the war machine, or they feel like he was taken too soon, or something like that. So by putting his image and part of his story, you know, as the precursor to the national anthem, that manipulated people's emotions to be more invested in this very American product that is, you know, the Super Bowl, the NFL, whatever you want it to be. So, knowing what I know about that situation, it didn't sit great with me because they left a lot of stuff out. But, you know, my family, I grew up military. My dad grew up military. It does inspire you to feel a certain way. You feel a level of duty, a level of pride, that kind of thing. So emotionally, essentially, pathos is an emotional appeal, or it's an attempt to get you to feel a certain way about something. Think about, you know, some of those old ads from like Hardee's where they would have supermodels eating these gigantic hamburgers and everything like that. You know, subconsciously, we all get what the message is to a certain extent, which is eat these burgers and these beautiful women will desire you, or something like that. Or, you know, if you take a look at certain cosmetic commercials and things like that, it's, you know, young people or women or men of a certain age buy this product. For men, a lot of times it's things like testosterone boosting once you hit 40, or hair growth, or problems, pills to help with problems in the bedroom, you know, to make you feel more manly, more masculine, everything like that. For women, you know, a lot of times it's, you know, wrinkle reducing cream, or it's bronzer, or self-tanning lotion, or body augmentation, either in the terms of clothing or surgery or things like that, to kind of make you achieve a certain kind of figure. And so the thought planted deep in your brain is, oh, well, if I do that, you know, then such and such will find me more attractive, or, you know, I'll have a more positive self-image or something like that. And that's not to say that's not true, but that's what they're trying to emotionally appeal to you, to get you to do something. All right. So logos is probably the one that most people have the kind of hardest time grasping. And really what this is does whatever this is behave as it should? Meaning, if this is meant to be a 20-minute comedy, you know, sitcom kind of episode for TV or Netflix or Hulu or whatever it is, Paramount, Peacock, gosh, there's so many of them now. But if it's meant to be a 20-minute episode of a sitcom, does it act like a sitcom? Does it have like a live audience, or does it have a laugh track that simulates a live audience? You know, do you have the kind of slapsticky physical comedy that's usually associated with it? Or for example, if you've ever seen like Parks and Recreation or The Office or mockumentary type shows where they act like it's a documentary, but it's not. And so basically, does it share the similar characteristics? You know, think about what would be normal in terms of a horror movie. You know, spooky place, people get trapped there, bad guy picks them off one by one, you know, the most unlikely person makes it to the end. What are some other commonalities? Like if you have sex during the movie, you die. Certain groups of people, be it you know, through race or gender or sexual proclivity, or the funny guy or the funny girl almost always dies, you know. So there are certain tropes or rules that you have that make something behave or act like what it's supposed to be. So what's interesting about it is that this one is probably the one that you'll say the least about, because these two are so much easier to spot. But being able to identify this is really, really, really important in terms of showcasing the full rhetorical strategy. So I'll give you an example. There are some episodes of certain shows where they don't behave as they should. And I'll give you one example. I know certain people watch it, certain people don't. You can go online and look it up. But there is, let me look it up so I can give you the episode number real quick. Family Guy. Okay. All right. So there's one episode. If you've never seen Family Guy, I'm not going to tell you to go out and watch it. It's not everybody's type of humor. It's pretty crass. It definitely is not politically correct in any sense of the word. So if that kind of stuff offends you, then by all means, like, don't go investigate this. But if we take a look at the episodes, they typically have this very normalized structure to it, where the dad does wacky things, everybody picks on the daughter, you know, the mom is kind of a drinker, the baby can talk and for some reason is British, you know, all that stuff. But they're very contained episodes. They're not super serious. They're meant to poke fun at a lot of stuff, and they don't usually have some big overarching theme or message or anything like that. One of the only exceptions to this is there's an episode, it's in season 8, episode 17, and it's called Brian and Stewie. Now, this episode does not behave the way that the other ones do. First of all, it's an unusual length. It runs between 30 and 40 minutes, whereas most Family Guy episodes without commercials run about 20, 22. So it's a little bit longer, and essentially the dog and the baby get trapped in a bank vault on a Friday afternoon, and they end up in a time-locked vault all weekend. And in the end, what the episode is really about is suicide awareness and self-harm and things like that. But it's not, it doesn't end on a joke. It's not overly, you know, knees buckling, stomach hurting, you know, just straight comedy. So it's very different. It's much more serious, and There are reasons for that. I'm not going to get into it right now, but that's an example of something not behaving as it should. Essentially, if something is behaving as it should, it should almost be indistinguishable. It should just be like another episode or another movie. Think about the Marvel movies. You know, at the end, I mean, there are some where heroes die, but at the end of the day, most of them have the hero discovering their powers, going through some sort of an adjustment period, flying, like living at the top of the world, and then they get their butt beat, you know, by the bad guy. And then they have to go through a period of reflection and training, kind of like Rocky or Apollo Creed in the Creed movies. And then they come out and, you know, usually win when they have the big bad guy battle at the end. So there's a very formulaic way of approaching that. When something breaks the formula, that's when you know it's not behaving as it should. So Logos focuses on all of the different ways that something is continuing the themes that made it part of a certain genre or part of a certain type of product, you know, whether it be an essay, a poem, an ad, a movie, a video, a TikTok, whatever it might be. So ideally, you would have several paragraphs that deal exclusively with these elements. So in video 2, we're going to talk about some more language having to do with this and some other aspects that you should be out on the lookout for. Okay? So please just remember, author, audience, and purpose work together to deliver the message. And then through analyzing the rhetorical process, you're going to look at the ethos, the credibility of the writer, as well as the evidence that they give, how they're trying to emotionally appeal to you, and whether or not it behaves like other things that it is in the same group as, or that it resembles. All right, so be on the lookout for part 2 of rhetorical analysis.